It's now March. Game of Thrones in about a week or so will be 1 month away. So this means, in my opinion, within the next week, we should be getting a trailer. There's a rumor going around on Reddit that there's supposed to be a trailer dropping on March 5th. The Redditor who dropped this information has proven to be credible in the past. Kit Harington is scheduled to make an appearance on the Colbert Show, and Good Morning America is set to have an exclusive Game of Thrones segment, and that's all going to be happening by this week. All that information aside, it is entirely possible for them to either release the trailer tomorrow or announce it in the up and coming days. In this video, I want to discuss several leaked scenes that may happen in Game of Thrones Season 8, but as always, the leaked part of this video is to be taken with a grain of salt and it is more or less for entertainment purposes. Here's your sign and let's begin. Before we get started, please slap a like on this video as the like goal is going to be 1,420. Also, make sure you're subscribed, and then, this is the most important part, make sure you have your notifications turned on so that way you get alerted every single time I drop a Game of Thrones video to what? This long night. Now, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, that rumor that's been floating around on Reddit seems all the more credible the closer we get to that actual release date. At this point in time, it's March 3rd, and that's less than 48 hours from now. So if we're going to get a third teaser, which has long been precedented, since we know that we've gotten one for Daenerys, we've gotten one for Jon Snow and crew, so the next one we need to get will central on Cersei and in King's Landing. There's a chance we could get that later on today, and then we'll get the actual trailer on Tuesday. I don't know if they'll line it up close like that, but it's been almost 2 years since the start of Season 7, so we kind of feel like we're owed something as super fans. Wait a second, let me rephrase that. We are owed something for waiting this long. Please just give us the trailer. That's all we ask for, and then in a few days, in about maybe 48 to 72 hours later, we're gonna be begging for more. That's kind of how these things go, and I think HBO knows that, so I think that's probably why they waited this long to give us the trailer. They know as soon as they give us the trailer, within a week, maybe even 2 weeks, we're gonna start begging for more information, and they know we're still gonna be a little over a month away from Game of Thrones, so they wanted to cut it as close as they could. The fact that they have all of these events scheduled, you know, Kit Harington going on the Stephen Colbert Show, and then the Good Morning America segment, and then the rumor that the actual trailer's coming out on March 5th, it wouldn't shock me if all this proves to be legitimate, and they finally launch into the actual campaigning season for Game of Thrones a little before a month away, and we get all of this stuff within 1 week. It's been pretty much a dry season with them releasing a few promo pictures and a few teasers, a total of maybe 15 seconds from Game of Thrones Season 8, so it would be nice if we got hit with all this stuff back to back, sort of like playing catch up. Speaking of promo pictures, we actually got like what a lot of people think are going to be the official Season 8 posters. Since we haven't gotten one this close and we know we're going to be getting a trailer pretty soon, it's obvious that these new run of promo images with literally everyone sitting on the Iron Throne is going to be considered the Season 8 poster. They've had so many so far, it's kind of hard to tell which one's the official poster, but I feel like this last big run with literally every single major character that's alive right now sitting on the Iron Throne, this is the Season 8 official poster. In my opinion, the one with Jon Snow or the one with Daenerys could be the official one. Isn't it ironic how similar Ned Stark looks to Jon Snow in these new images? A lot of people are saying this is foreshadowing that Jon Snow will die in the end, and in my opinion, well, that's completely wrong. The main difference being is that Jon Snow has the strongest, one of the strongest claims to the Iron Throne, and in Season 1, Ned thought he was one of the strongest people in the kingdom, being the hand of the king to Robert. Well, Jon Snow actually is. With the alliance that he formed with Daenerys in Game of Thrones Season 7, Jon Snow is the strongest male ruler in the Seven Kingdoms. Daenerys is, of course, the strongest ruler in the Seven Kingdoms, but Jon Snow is a close second, and the two of them together make one of the greatest alliances Westeros has ever seen, unlike Ned from Season 1. So even though they may invoke the same sort of imagery of Jon Snow and Ned from Season 1, the circumstances and situations could not be any more different. And since we're talking about these images, I do want to say that for the most part, everyone's outfit seems to be a lot darker of a color palette than it naturally is. I think the person who created these images was trying to invoke in our heads that this is the final season, everything is going to be a lot more grim than it was in the past, and the main theme of them all sitting on the Iron Throne, well, that's been the campaign theme for this final season, for the throne. I noticed when they released the Tyrion image on Twitter, a bunch of people that were commenting mentioned how it looks as though Tyrion is missing a hand. I didn't really notice this at first because, well, he's not missing a hand. This is just the color, in my opinion, this is just the color grading that they use. Tyrion's hand appears as if it's dark. We did have the special effects crew trolling us last year about how Tyrion will either die or he won't die. They're basically trolling us because they know that one of the biggest leaks that's happened so far, that's honestly at this point still official rumor is that Tyrion will betray Daenerys, and at the very end of the season, he will have a trial that will result in his death in the dragon. But we've been trolled on this before, and I feel like that's exactly what happened in this image. Or it's just because the color grading made it appear as though Tyrion was missing a hand. If you really zoom in and look closely at the image, you can see Tyrion's thumb. He's gripping the throne in a way where half of his hand or 4 of his fingers aren't visible, but his thumb is, and you can sort of see them behind the hilt of his sword. Aside from Cersei's dress appearing in the traditional Lannister colors, I think that is a definite trickery with Photoshop. We've seen her in this exact same dress in these leaked images of her meeting with Jon Snow, and you can clearly see that the dress is actually blue and not this purple-red color that appears to be in this image. In my opinion, this is confirmed a trick of Photoshop, because if you look at Daenerys, she's wearing the same dress that she wore at Dragonstone. Now, we know she's been switched out of that outfit. And now I want to quickly mention some more of my thoughts on these images before we move on to the leaks. For the most part, the warriors in the show all have their armaments at hand. They're ready for battle, and they look as though they're going to take out the Night King. Now, Big Blue himself actually doesn't have his spear. I guess that would have been a little bit impractical, but if you'll notice, Euron doesn't have a weapon either. In my opinion, along with Jaime, every single warrior who is known to carry a sword and can defend themselves that doesn't actually have a weapon may stand a chance of dying in the final season. It doesn't really make sense why certain characters who can defend themselves aren't actually armed. This could be another red herring like Cersei's dress, but it is kind of interesting that certain characters, well, the ones who stand the biggest chance of dying anyway, don't have weapons in these images. We all know the Night King will die by the end. There's rumors that Nikolaj Coster-Waldau's contract will be up by episode 4. Euron is going to be dealt with early on, and like I mentioned earlier, Tyrion has long been suspected of betraying Daenerys. I actually made a video way back in 2017, a few months after the show went off the air, where I mentioned how that conversation that Tyrion and Cersei had off screen in Game of Thrones season 7 is going to come back to play out in this final season. And that brings me to the leaks. I was actually sent some information through the DMs over on Twitter. Speaking of which, make sure you follow me as Sir_Hunts, but this person correctly predicted the Crypts of Winterfell teaser, and they mentioned that there will be a point in Game of Thrones season 8 where Jaime will actually give his Valyrian steel sword to Arya. He claimed that this was the reason why Jaime's sword was not visible in these promo pictures that were released towards the beginning of February. And the reason why I mention this is because if you look at the images that were just released the other day of everyone sitting on the Iron Throne, well, Jaime is missing his sword. He's not physically holding it in these images, and you can't see the pommel at his waist like you normally would. Now you're probably like, wait, hold up, Sir Hunts. He didn't even leave King's Landing with it in Game of Thrones season 7 episode 7. So why would he have it at Winterfell when he comes to aid Jon Snow and Daenerys? And to that I replied, Jaime actually took it with him. Right as he stops to check his gloves, or to put a glove over his golden hand rather, which I speculated that he's doing this so that it's not so obvious that he's a Lannister, and also because this is signifying that he's putting the last bit of himself that was a Lannister to dead and leaving Cersei behind. The covering of the gold sort of represents that. When they go for the overhead panned out shot, you can see Widow's Wail right there. Now the leaker did mention some more information, and for that you can actually check the description down below for a link to that video. The new leak scene that I want to discuss, or one of them rather, has to do with Tyrion and his trial. This person states that Tyrion's trial scene in season 8 very much mirrors the meeting between Cersei and Daenerys last season. There's a sense of doom. Anything can happen at any second, and the audience will feel the intensity through the screens. The actual scene of his trial begins with Tyrion being marched into the pit by Grey Worm and Jorah. Tyrion is in chains and attempts to make a joke to break the tension. No one laughs, and Daenerys, in tears, cannot even look his way. Jon Snow starts the trial stating that, Tyrion Lannister, you stand accused of treason against the crown, plotting with our enemies and sacrificing nearly 1 million lives for your own selfish reasons. And this person goes on to state that this is sort of a huge side note, but Jon has been convinced at this point by Sansa and Bran that Tyrion is responsible for the death of Daenerys. Even though she is resurrected, but their child is lost and used as a blood sacrifice to resurrect her, every nearly surviving Dothraki and Unsullied is destroyed during the invasion of King's Landing, and that is blamed on Tyrion's planning. Under Tyrion's instructions, they all enter King's Landing through the tunnels and are destroyed when Drogon is sent on a rage after Daenerys is hit in the heart with an arrow. Jon then mounts Drogon, flies him to the Red Keep, and burns Cersei alive while she is sitting on the Iron Throne. Jon kind of blamed Tyrion since they used his strategy, but his anger is misplaced. The temporary loss of Daenerys clouds his judgment, and Jon is easily manipulated by Bran and Sansa. Now back to the leaked scene. After Jon opens the trial, Tyrion begins to try and explain to everyone that it was a giant mistake. Tyrion states that he has stood wrongly accused before twice on trial, and this time is no different. He says that they have all made mistakes, and Tyrion even tries to give examples to each of the person that's on the jury each time they've made a mistake in their past, and this blows up in his face. Sansa interrupts him and begins explaining how he must have known of Cersei's treachery. She had been plotting this long behind their backs, and surely Tyrion must have known of this. Before he can reply, Bran begins stating that he knows what was said between the meeting of Cersei and Tyrion last season. Bran states that he promised her, no matter what Tyrion did, that he promised Cersei no matter what, her child would be safe. Even if it meant betraying his queen, one day her child would sit the Iron Throne. Tyrion made a promise to Cersei that he would ensure this. Bran claims that this is why Tyrion has Daenerys' troop enter through a certain location, and that proved fatal to Daenerys as well as parts of her army. After Bran finishes his speech, Daenerys finally makes eye contact with Tyrion for the first time. And just sort of adding in my own little side note here, this person never actually mentions how Daenerys is resurrected. They just mention that she is. But they go on to finish their information, stating that the scene ends with Arya suggesting that perhaps Tyrion can serve at the wall. They state that Arya notices how Daenerys reacts to Tyrion's impending demise and attempts to intervene. Jon agrees with her, but Tyrion interrupts both Jon and Arya. He begins stating that what he has done cannot be forgiven, and that the wall is far too cold for his liking. In these moments, Tyrion accepts death, and the Reigns of Castamere begins playing for the very last time. We are not shown how he dies, and instead the camera cuts to black and then continues with a time jump shortly thereafter. Now I'll add my input, but not too much, because I've covered so many different versions of Tyrion's trial. At this point, it just sort of seems redundant repeating myself. I do love the details that this leak brings. It's sort of questionable that it doesn't mention how Daenerys was resurrected, but the way that it has Tyrion's final moments of his trial going down, well, that sounds like something that HBO is familiar with. We know that The Sopranos is probably the next biggest show aside from Game of Thrones, and the way that ended pissed a lot of people off, but it was also very anticlimactic. Like, you intensely suspected something to happen the entire time when Tony was sitting at the diner eating with his family. I mean, literally every single time a person moved in the background, you thought they were going to whip out a pistol and shoot Tony and his family in the face, but they didn't do that. They just cut to black, and we never really found out what happened. The fact that this leak has Tyrion's trial ending the final episode of Game of Thrones in a very similar way, and then, we sort of get a time jump. Well, this would make everyone happy. We don't have to see the pain of watching a beloved character die on screen, but then we also get closure in the sense that we find out what happens to everyone else. You all let me know what you think about this leak down below in the comments section. For now, I'm going to jump into the next one. Now, this leak, air quotations there, was sent to me by an entirely different person, and it's pretty short and to the point, but I did like it nonetheless because I haven't really been sent something that proposed a similar idea. This person states that next season, the Maesters will plot with Cersei to take down Daenerys and her dragons. They provide her with Valyrian teal-tipped ballistas, and they assure her that nothing will fly harder or faster, confirming that a dragon cannot maneuver out of the way of these steel-tipped arrows. Earlier in this season, Qyburn can be seen parlaying with someone from Old Town, and in those moments, a deal is then struck that he will share what he knows of life and death, and in exchange, they will provide Cersei with the ability and the resources to defeat Daenerys and her dragons. Apparently, they all agree on the fact that even if the army of the dead pose such a great threat, surely he alone cannot take out 3 more dragons. They're aware of the apparent resurrection of Viserion, and this prompts them into immediate action. This person states that the scene with Qyburn meeting with one of the members of the council from Old Town actually happens in episode 1, and we get to see the fruits of this meeting in episode 6 when Jon and Daenerys finally make it down to King's Landing and begin to lay siege on Cersei. One of the arrows that was provided to Qyburn by the Maesters actually clips through Rhaegal's wings. This forces him to land as he is unable to fly, and then begins breathing flame all over King's Landing. And that's where the leak cuts off. But what's interesting is about 2 weeks ago, I was actually tagged in a status by a user on Twitter who showed me a clip of a screen record that he did on his iPad, and apparently this is a studio in Belfast that, as you're seeing right now, this is the destruction of King's Landing. And as you can see, it doesn't really look that well for Cersei. As far as this leak's credibility, well, like all of them, they're most likely horse shit and are mostly talked about and discussed in my videos for purely entertainment purposes. But I kind of like this one, and the fact that it brought back the Maesters, and that's not really something that we've heard a lot of speculation or leaks about throughout this long night. Alright, and with that being said, I want to thank you all so much for watching. If you could please slap a like on this video, as the like goal is going to be 1,420. Make sure you're subscribed, and then this is the most important part. Make sure you have your notifications turned on so that way you get alerted every single time I drop a Game of Thrones video throughout this long night. Super special shout out to every single person watching this video, and a super special thank you to every single member of my Patreon family over on patreon.com/SirHuntsReviews. I want to thank you all again so much for watching. My name's Mark, and this has been Sir Hunts.